Hello there, welcome to yet another episode here on Civic Space TV of Focus on Parliament, I beg your pardon. My name is Lynn Komugisha, and today we sit with Joseph Ochieno, a political analyst. I have with me Olaa Okot, a lawyer and founding member Kampala Analytica, as well as Harris Akampurira, Speaker Kawempe Division. And we are looking at the effectiveness of parliamentary probes and also the local content bill that was passed a few days ago. Gentlemen, glad to have you today.
Good to be here. Nice seeing you here.
Fantastic. Oh, yeah, I know, Joseph, what you're about to say. Don't say.
No, of course not. But pleasure.
Right, so if you've just joined us, go to our social media platforms at Civic Space TV, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, and of course YouTube, where we bring you the latest developments and analysis here and there. So we're glad you're joining us. And once again, my name is Lynn Komugisha. Let's take a look at effectiveness of parliamentary probes and the local content bill. Now, if you remember, not so long ago, we have had our parliament look into very different entities, state enterprises, and persons as well. And here we ask ourselves, if you remember, the NSSF probe, there was the KCCA probe, there was also UNRA, Uganda Airlines. The list is endless. We have had these probes and reports of these probes, tabled before Parliament, and then it's a long day conversation for members of Parliament. Question here is, then what? That's the biggest question. So as you ponder, let's also get into it here. And I want to begin with you, Mr. Olaa. What do you make of our parliamentary probes? I feel like the 11th Parliament so far has had countless probes in the space of a few years they've been into Parliament.
Yeah.
But before that, what stood out for you this week in Parliament?
Yeah, thank you very much. For me, it was definitely the local content bill.
Okay.
I'm a big fan of some of the economics around protectionism versus free trade, what it means, for example, what are the long-term effects of this local content bill? Mm-hmm. Does it really benefit the people they assume it's going to benefit?
I like that you're taking us very quickly into it.
Yes.
But yes.
I mean, yeah, so for me, that was a very interesting development this week. Mm-hmm. And I look forward to dissecting it, discussing it, but also learning from my colleagues. But also to see how the president reacts, because I think he has sent it back twice.
Twice, yes.
I think I know why.
You will tell us why.
Given his background with, minimum wage issues and stuff like that in the past. But yeah, so for me that was an interesting issue on my side.
Okay.
In terms of the probes, I was talking to a colleague of mine, and maybe on this panel together with my colleague, I perhaps represent the views of some of the younger lot within this country. I was having a conversation with a friend, and he said, by the way, this is a revolutionary government.
Oh.
And you don't expect normal things to be occurring. So
by normal, what are we talking about?
I have no idea. I am quoting him. I am quoting him verbatim. Okay. But we have a system that for a lot of us young people we found in place that has certain aspects. It's like we have a bipolar government. There are certain aspects of asserting systems in place. You have a probe going on. The appointments are done well. You have a lead of opposition or an opposition member leading it. You have particular aspects of, in terms of deliberation of these sessions, they're going on well. A lot of issues are brought out, but somewhere in the middle, everything gets lost. Mm-hmm. And then you ask yourself, okay, what happened exactly? Mm-hmm. Sometimes you hear that there's an order that there shouldn't be cameras in the room. Yeah. Sometimes you hear that different reasons. For purposes of protection of the public image. If you remember, for example, with Bank of Uganda, there was an argument from somewhere that maybe it makes more sense for such a sensitive institution to be protected, and therefore the probe should, not be something very public. And a lot of these instructions that come from particular centers of power, and I think perhaps more than anything that this could be because we are a country that has been under one government for 40 years. Power is really centered. We can see that normally when the systems fail, guerrilla-like units are set up. For example, at State House, there's an anti-corruption unit that is much more faster. We know that the advisory to the president's office is also called the high-speed unit. So there are these pseudo units that kind of show there is a centering of power, and that centering of power has its own modus operandi. It may not have the wide spectrum of ideas or be receptive to a wide spectrum of ideas to a system, because it is the system, it built the system and has consolidated the system. So what the effects may be perhaps also to a lot of us, the young people, is that we get highly demoralized, because on the one side you're seeing a system working, and then somehow everything disappears in a limbo. So we have a lot of young people that are demoralized, disappointed in the institution of parliament. But like I think he was trying to itch out before we started the show, that could the MPs be, maybe they're doing their work and there's something else coming from somewhere.
And I think this is what we need to identify. What is that something else? And
exactly, this causes a phenomenon among a lot of us where you're not disappointed because you may not know who to point at hands.
Absolutely.
Or the person to point at is too powerful. So you end up just generally demoralized.
Wow. Harris,
I
want to pick Harris's mind. What stood out for you this week in Parliament?
First of all, hello to all our viewers. Thank you, Lynn, and colleagues for joining us for this show. Lynn, it's rare, it's a rarity in this country to have a positive story coming out of Parliament. I don't know. I think they even have the disadvantage of a negative social psychological perception. People generally, the public, not expecting a positive story, and actually they kind of prove that.
Maybe
controversy after controversy. It's rare to really get a story out of the Parliament of Uganda that gives hope of the future, that portrays that institution as a check, because when you look at our design of government, the three arms of government, and our constitutional framework, Parliament is part of the system of checks and balances, and the theoretical kind of orientation of the checks and balances is that power to be concentrated in one organ is so bad. I know there's an aphorism that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So we want to diffuse power in various centers as much as possible. So Parliament is one of those organs that is actually supposed to help the public check on the executive, so that the executive doesn't use its power. But unfortunately, it hasn't played that role. And this has been a perennial problem. And we all know why, because for over this period, it has been captured. It's one of those state institutions that has been properly captured and it has been cowed. So it has surrendered, it has been defeated. So some of the things we talk about are merely formalistic, because the institution has to do its routine work either way, not because they fulfill its constitutional mandate, but merely to rubber stamp. If their function doesn't seriously challenge the powers, it will pass. If what they are doing actually strikes at the center, then it doesn't happen. And in as far as it doesn't perform its role of challenging the power, then it is useless. It is useless because we want it most when it is supposed to check the executive power. But not to discredit completely, because I think that people, good men and women, they are trying to do some work. Today, the leader of opposition and their team, they were launching the alternative budget speech, wherein they were trying to say, look here, I think we need to shift our mindset from the kind of budget. You know, when President Museveni came into power in 1986, ever since they have been having like one template, year in of the budget, year in, year out, say template.
They changed recently.
Just figures change.
They changed recently.
Not so much. I could get the budgets annual and compare them and clear the same template.
The budgeting
No innovation.
system changed recently.
Well, I'm not aware of that.
I think it was last year, but I think it's sort of the content.
Yes. So because I can tell you it is gonna always be State House, it's going to be foreign aid, it's about classified budget, and all the other
defense and security.
Yes,
No,
defense and security.
Infrastructure was more recent. But
Substantively, that is the budget. That's a budget. That's a budget. So social security and other services where the Ugandan is who needs that budget, schools, roads, it doesn't go there. And that has been so for so long. So what the opposition is proposing is that let's have a budget that's human rights based. Let's give no emphasis to the socio-economic rights. And let Parliament not pass a budget if the executive does not respect certain fundamental human rights and freedoms. I think that's a positive story. I don't know how much how far it will go, but it's some good thinking in the right direction.
And to think that it is the opposition coming up with that, and we don't know who is going to the receiver of that. Anyway, we shall get. I think that's a very interesting one to look out for as well. Now, Joseph, having heard from these two gentlemen, what stood out for you this week in Parliament? And we are looking at these probes, and day in day out, there's a new committee probing something. And we keep getting these reports, and then he says, Olaa says something stalls somewhere.
But just to say that, as you know, I'm big on big issues. I am big on gender. I am big on youth. But I'm particularly very big on the future. And in many cases, I have been presented as possibly unrealistically too optimistic. And yet, I am absolutely very big on 40 years of NRA as a disaster. And until I say, no, there is hope in this country, and then, I am again accused of that. And to hear these young guys articulate so well on the issue, some of these, the issues as of the issues related to today's debate is consoling. I must say that, yes, the local content a bill, which is possibly hopefully soon to be a legislation, is a big thing. But I can tell you that actually there was no need for it, because what they're talking about is primarily what UPC delivered for in the 60s. Everyone tells it, there comes, No. It's what's to come. But I'm just giving the headlines. I
always have to start from UPC.
No, because UPC is the reality here. But what I'm trying to say, and maybe it helps remind you guys, and I think part of what you're trying to hint about, including the budget, of course, I'm coming to that deliberately, and it's because of the submission that I brought that. That it did. Number two was the fact that two legislators were released, and the headlines up to yesterday, Friday's morning and afternoon, was about whether or not there was a deal, and whether or not their colleagues knew they were going to be released,
I think
and
it's
whether or
almost
not
a month. And we're still having that.
Precisely. And I found it very interesting. And I was asking, where are the legislators, these guys, colleagues and compatriots? And then 3, just the other days, meaning the other week, there had been this big thing about the right for the anti-homosexuality bill, for which people thought the legislators were really, really actively pushed. And was it really these moralist, sharp Ugandans? Or is it an agenda? Or is it one of those things that everyone else is populist because we think that we're able to run with it? But then, back to the question of the effectiveness and the alternative budget. Alternative budgets generally supposed to be new things. And I imagine even the British Parliament, possibly as recent as 25 years ago, when a shadow chancellor presents an alternative budget.
Yeah.
What usually should happen in a democracy is that the shadow team, alternative political parties, should have their programs almost consistent with their manifestos, and that's why I was going to question law content thing, and say that, well, if we were in government today, this is how we would spend, this is where we would spend the most, and this is possibly how we would generate resources, and you guys are being bad in government. That's a natural thing. So this should be as a matter of course. And so therefore, debates in Parliament, including when the government brings the budget, the debates that follows in terms of critiquing this is almost, if you like, tearing apart the real budget by simply saying that, well, here you've excessively spent, here is what you should have done, and the country is watching, meaning the fourth estate, I mean the fourth arm of government, which is you guys in the media, watching, and they see that, well, these guys presented to us what they call a thick revolutionary budget, but it's actually froth. And the other small opposition party, sometimes does not necessarily be the main opposition party, has come with the brilliant ideas, so that a young lady like our camera person, as soon as she turns 18, says, those are the ones I'm going to vote for. Because they've pushed this on education, they've pushed this on health, and even some young sharp lawyer who was particularly not very good in mathematics now said, you know what, actually the figures do seem to add up. Now, because of the nature of the state we've had, these things have really not presented themselves. And then the other thing then perhaps is manifestation of the malaise that my young colleagues are trying to hint at, how possibly helpless the parliament is, meaning that people go down there to have conversations, to complain, and then their hands wiggle up, and at the end of the day, you know, whatever you do, the thing will pass because members of parliament are whipped. So in other words, I'm saying that things could work better if perhaps, in other words, I'm saying in many ways, if perhaps there were commitments by much more reformed new legislators. And one of the few things, I know this is an introductory part of a conversation, and again, my young friends, they will talk about parts of the hope that I'm talking about, was that this parliament was substantially hailed by some of my own friends in the Legislative Assembly who are relatively young people. Say that because of a parliament of younger people, it was going to be vibrant, and these are people who wanted the future and they want their future, and no funny buzz are going to hold them hostage. Thus far, there is no evidence to that effect. So, in a way, the fact that, as I said, particularly these two guys would go through these and then they would be silenced, tells me that, well, what exactly is happening? But of course, as we're going to be discussing the big thing, which is local content, I'm simply saying that, well, let's wait and see.
Let's wait and see. Our parliament keeps, and it's not just you people here. People out there keep saying that something is wrong with our parliament. They focus on things, and then you're thinking, okay, this is going right, then somehow nothing. And so this brings me back to you, Mr. Olaa, and it's us, and I'm asking myself. So you did hint on the fact that something somewhere stalls, and holds us back or holds the parliament back. The question here is it what actually makes it fail? Why does it always fail at especially the probes? Let's just focus a little bit on these probes, because there are many and they affect our people out there. And people want answers, but we never seem to get these answers. So who fails, or what fails these probes?
Yeah, I mean, when we're in law school, the first thing we're taught is that we are referred to Benjamin Odoki's words of the state is 3 stones holding together a pot. And like we have, I think from our discussion, you can see that it's hard to isolate the probes and diagnose it as the problem and try to improve it. If you go that path, you might end up saying we need to add more water on the table or something like that. But this is a systematic issue. And the rule of law is basically the rule of law, which is the epitome of democracy, is very important. If you look at, as I've said, the effect on us as a generation is not disappointment, it's anger, not even anger. It's mostly demoralization. And democracy, I've been in a bus, for example, in Uganda here, going to maybe the north, and maybe someone is really overspeeding. The driver is really overspeeding. And the people are even quiet. They're shy to stand up and say no, you know. And then I've also been lucky to be in other places where something small, just even in Rwanda, where if you do something wrong, the people actually stand up. So the rule of law is actually culture. And I think drawing from, for example, China's example, where every leader comes as, for example, almost an era. Every leader defines a theory, a next step for China. We could see the difference between, for example, Mao Zedong and Deng. Right now we see Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping actually has a whole theory of where he wants to take China, even before he became president. But the difference between China and here is that they phase. When Xi Jinping is done with his strategic role, he's phased out. And then a next group comes and develops on that crop. There are things that we can appreciate that maybe when the Ochengs were young and in the your peers were in the Legislative Assembly, had a lot of hopes. And perhaps one of the major ones was stabilizing the country. You've heard many times that corruption was not a priority. Perhaps there were other issues at that point that were maybe lower in the, more existential to the Ugandan. For example, your life being at risk, constant risk. But I think that phased out, and we missed the opportunities to phase out that particular era and then build on it. And so we have lost opportunities to expand the pool of ideators, to expand the pool of ideas, and we are still at a centralized point that hinges from a very far point back in time. So I think rule of law, until we actually end this phase, is going to be a systemic problem. Yeah, so that is how I would like to look at it. I don't think there's a problem with the probes as the probes. But there's a cultural problem. It's a software issue. And the software is outdated.
I like that he uses the language of the young.
Software. All right.
The software is outdated.
So we need to revisit the software and do some.
Thank you.
Harris, we have these problems. He says it's a problem of the systems, the software. It's not the hardware. The software is really needs a little bit of a boost here and there. And do you think that would make any difference at all?
Well, I think that things have to be fixed at the system level. In terms of architecture of governance, the probe is an investigation.
Yes.
It's one of the ways through which Parliament is able to play its oversight role. And I want to pick 2 examples of probes by Parliament of Uganda to demonstrate exactly what is happening.
Were they successful?
We had the NSSF probe. It was successful. We had then the airline.
A successful probe, not a successful outcome. Okay.
No. I want to demonstrate exactly what happened. So usually before Parliament actually appoints a committee to conduct a probe, it means there is a problem. Someone has reported that there is a problem, usually involving money. Or usually abuse of office. So an investigation is set into motion. what happens in reality depends on who actually is implicated.
Yeah.
Wait,
Yes.
on who is implicated?
Whether the probe is going to be successful and the results and the report of the committee that is conducting the probe is going to be worked upon depends on who is implicated. And for as long as we can recollect, as Ugandans, at least as reported by Parliament, by media, there's no probe that actually has led to an arrest of those implicated.
That's the
Meaning that whoever is involved in these cases that lead to probes is someone in power, higher in the hierarchy of power. And if you recall, I think it was the IGG, I think...
Irene
Mudiagonja, very good. She said that people who are carrying out scandalous, who are involved in mass cases of corruption in this country, are shielded by the president. And the president just recently, I think it was at Kololo, he confirmed the words of Mudiagonja, the IGG, when she instructed another IGG, the Honorable Betty Kamia, that please, you cannot investigate.
This is a criminal.
There are people you cannot, they are beyond reproach. But that's a problem.
As long as
that has a nationwide teaching effect. At the departmental level, at the ministry level, at everyone. It means whoever holds power at that level, it's up to you to determine who you excuse, how much you steal, how much. So that's a problem. We have a corrupt leader, we have a thief who has outlived his usefulness, who has captured every institution. So the problems of Uganda, the decadence, the ineffectiveness of the parliament, of the judiciary now, of our media, every institution has been captured. And for as long as it is...
It's a revolutionary government.
Yes. That's what they call it, but that's nonsense upon stilts. So what actually happening is that we are going to move into this cycle of scandals, probes that never lead to results. The actual results are going to be yielded after Museveni, when we start.
I like that both of you kind of have almost a similar conclusion.
Yes.
Because he talks about systems as well. He talks about ending a certain age or era for something else to to pick up or improve. Now,
and Lynn, you see the danger in that we have a whole productive segment of the population that is like in abeyance, like in the waiting lounge, if I use the airport language, waiting for this gentleman to leave and they start being productive. Many of them have died. So
the guys who are in the queue.
Now,
and not just people, but even ideas.
Absolutely.
We also have ideas in the waiting that cannot be, because everything, the ribbon must be cut by a particular person for whatever idea.
Now, Joseph, you were here before this system happened. This new architectural design that we have, and if I could remember what Olaa really talked about, he said that we should have built on what was there instead of breaking afresh to start afresh and as if do away with what was there. We should have built systems and improved on them. What is happening now is that we are not seeing results because of the lack of a shift in the structure, a breathing space in the structure. Now, they fail, okay? We have seen why they fail. Do you agree these are the problems that cause the probes to fail? And if so, what then? What happens elsewhere as well?
You know, I had very much intended not to heavily politicize this debate, and although
Please don't, because our young people have issues with politics.
No, and that's extremely dangerous. And politicizing only to the extent that it becomes perhaps partisan. The entirety of this game, the entirety of the conversation is politics. In fact, the entirety of the probes, politics, and the entirety of the conversation we talk about, where in this country, my country, legislators can be beaten, is political. That political leaders, heads of political organizations can be removed, had the issues removed, is massively political. And to the extent that the most representative, generally in broader democracies, assemblies tend to be more of in parliament than the directly elected presidency. And that the assembly, in this case, the legislature, parliament, it becomes and is very clearly an organ representing a particular organization and particular interest, and everyone else is a bystander, means that I want to say what I did not want to say, that actually this is clearly dictatorship. And in my case, I said, we told you so. Now, for many of you young guys, if you may not know, once this constitution was being constituted, we call it actually NRA constitution, number one. And two, we substantially argued that actually Parliament is an NRC. And if you go to objective number one of the NRA-NRM revolution, as they call it, actually Parliament is equivalent of NRC. And in there, they also say all decisions, all political decisions will be made by the High Command. And you know who and what the High Command is. So what these young guys are saying is basically what we've been saying in different ways. My mini consolation, rather than despair, is actually that they're very clear about it. I could say that, well, they're seeing what we've been saying all along. Now, my only slight worry is the critical number of people who say, well, this thing is locked, the software is locked in some kind of cage, and we're not going to do anything until it, cannot. You're so fantastic. Ochieno, yes, man. You cannot hack it. No, this software needs to be hacked, and it needs to be hacked urgently. It needs to be hacked by the youth of this country. We need to have a conversation in this country to the extent that we say to the young guys that actually probes are possible, probes work, democracy works, politics works, and particularly for the young, beautiful ladies that I meet out in the street, say, I'm not interested in politics. I tell them, when you tell me like that, I know you're very beautiful. Sometimes I wonder, no, politics is the most important game in town on the entirety of the African continent. Here in Uganda, it's even much more urgent. Now, there was a probe, one probe in the 60s, talk about corruption thing.
Sure.
Your colleagues talk about corruption that, well, because I wasn't quite sure what you're trying to say. Corruption was not a big thing in the past pre-NRA, because the leaders were not corrupt, and there was this drive for national democratic liberation, and it was genuine. Now, the only one corruption that emerged that Parliament rigorously investigated was the 60s gold scandal, which was a huge debate in the National Assembly of the 60s. Now, that was even about a man the president had appointed to go and carry out operations in neighboring country, got himself in doing other things, and this thing came back as corruption. So meaning the man got involved in gold scandal. That was investigated by Parliament. And once it was found that Amin had actually got engaged in gold activities in Congo, there was a preparation to arrest Amin, and that is one of the two reasons why his backers, the Israelis, told him that, well, Omote coming from Singapore is coming to arrest you. One, because it's alleged you killed Brigadier Koya, and two, over this gold scandal thing. But we can help you, to deal with him before he deals with you. So that is one.
No,
but
so have a different version of that.
Of course you would. Of course you would have. You would have a different version of that.
That we are taught in the political history book.
Indeed, and the people who taught you those political...
the president there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And of course I know that.
Yeah.
And the guys who taught you, tell them that they're as much a net contributor to the problems we got today, as the people associated with Idi Amin. And the people who taught you those things, while I still sufficiently breathe, Lynn needs to facilitate, and I'm challenging it, facilitate a conversation so that we're able to discuss these things holistically, so that you, the young Ugandans, ought to know, one, the truth of what happened in the 60s, two, to know that corruption can be done with, and three, that Parliament should be an assembly in which legislators are honorable men and women who go there on free will to debate and have a conversation, and there are no consequences about phone calls from elsewhere. I will be very much a lead guest speaker in that. The Parliament, or what a true Parliament, I don't know. There was none that I know of. Now, granted, it could be said that UPC was a predominant party, but DP was a very big party, 35%
Yes.
kind of staff,
Yeah.
representative. No issues. And to the extent that no MP could be swayed in many of these things.
Maybe then we did have a lot of money as a
No, in a way,
Distress people.
of course, that's not true. We built things that today it would be worth maybe 3 times the Uganda's economy today, to today's money. But what I'm saying is that, so those sort of happened then. But fast forward to where we are. What exactly the problem? I'm trying to encourage young Ugandans to get much more interested to know that there are actually 4 arms of government, that the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive, and indeed you, the fourth estate as the media. And then you should, all organs of the state should be able to function in the interest of the citizens. So in a situation in which Ochieno has got an issue to answer, Ochieno should be put on the spot on the cameras to be challenged and tasted. And Ochieno should be able to respect that. That happens in democracy. Here, it's not a recent state capture. NRA came to power in 1986, banned political parties. Of course, it was forced politically 20 years later to return to multipartyism. So that hasn't changed. So while sometimes we have these conversations where our young people get very frustrated, what's happening? No, the system was designed like that. So unless we push the conversation to...
They have now learned that the software...
Yes, but I mean, unless, and that's why the background is important, unless they learn that actually the issue is the software, and this software here, we need to have the energy and the courage to have a free, open conversation like this to say, how can we undo this? And that will liberate Parliament, that will liberate the judiciary, that will, in my opinion, liberate perhaps the institution of the president, because an institution, not an individual. And in my opinion, that will deliver for the country. So it's actually possible. But thus far, I think it's very much that it's basically a one-man show, and you agree with it, or you either agree with it or not. And that's, I think, part of the hints that my colleagues here are saying that, well, probes may take place, but people will be getting instructions from elsewhere.
Yeah,
Wow.
and I think just before we go for the break, that one of the symptoms of this issue that you're talking about, a lot of brilliant young people around the streets of town, but even the demoralization you can clearly see in the people that are trying to represent the future. You know? On both sides.
Yeah.
You know, the state, those who are protected by the state or appear to be backed by the state, and in opposition, both don't really. It's not, they don't open up a space. If you look at their payrolls, you will not find the kind of persons that are discussing issues like state software, you know? So I think, like he is saying, it's very important that the young people, when we meet like this, interrogate ourselves and introspect, that we also start to build, because what these people are building is a machine. So if you build, you know, you compound a machine together as young people come together, start compounding a machine that discusses some of these real issues, is the only way we are going to hack. Because what we see as leaders for the future is actually a symptom of a lot of demoralized young people. It's not that the young people are dumb, but they don't feel like it's called for anymore. You know, so
that it will yield the results. Sorry.
This is what
we are not used to results. Like, we are not used to.
You need to think outside the box.
Yes,
that you're in,
and it's something that needs to be almost trained into, because
we are here.
Fantastic, fantastic.
Thank you.
We need to take a break. When we return, we have more conversations on this, and of course, look at the local content bill. But very interesting here. I don't know if the youth out there are ready to, you know, get into the back room and do some hacking of this software, or how we're going to go about it. We'll be back in a bit.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create and publish digital media, or to access and use computers, other electronic devices and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Welcome back. You're still watching Civic Space TV, and this is Focus on Parliament, and we're trying to understand and get into, unpack a little bit of what happened in Parliament and what we think, we ought to take a look at. Among the other things, if you've just joined us, we're looking at the effectiveness of parliamentary probes, but we're also looking at the recently passed bill, the Local Content Bill 2022. It has been passed into law by Parliament, giving priority to goods and services produced in the East African community, as opposed to only goods produced in Uganda. Now, this bill was first introduced in the 9th Parliament, and it was returned to the House for reconsideration by President Yoweri Museveni over its contradiction with various ESC trade protocols, such as the Common Market Protocol, which provides for the elimination of trade barriers, among several others. And with me is Olaa Okot, a lawyer and founding member of Kampala Analytica, Harris Akampurira, Speaker, Kawempe Division, and of course, Joseph Ochieno, a political analyst, of course, UPC. We have to put that as a special tag, otherwise he will not be amused. So, gentlemen, we have the Local Content Bill passed. And I want to begin with Olaa for one reason. He seems to be very passionate about this bill. And I want him to tell us briefly, give us an insight into why you think this bill is important at this time and passing it. Do you think the president is going to assent to it?
I don't think I'm passionate about the bill in terms of that it's perfect.
Okay.
I'm more interested in having it. And we have just been talking about probing. Perhaps as our parliament and brains behind this should have the right questions while developing some of these bills. We have had local content derives from a wider urge within governance, which is protectionism. The urge to protect, protect within the borders of the country for your people, for your companies. And it comes from different situations that, may arise that cause, sometimes it's political, but even economically, there are certain forces. For example, there could be economic shifts. We see China coming in a lot in the country. We see Indians within Uganda. So within our context, there's that urge that, it's a reaction sometimes to particular external forces. You could see the Indians, the Chinese, and all these foreigners within the country operating with a lot of favor. There's a whole investment package where I think I'm not sure, but you could even be picked up from the airport as a foreigner. So in reaction to that, we have an instance where our certain persons, in this case, I think it's called Nsamba, from Kasamba, North County, pushed a private member's bill to see that local content is protected. Now, the president's reaction is not a one-off. It comes from two deep motives. One, that of East African integration, which he has been the greatest driver, though East Africans in general believe that Uganda is the one dragging everyone behind in terms of. But as individual, he has been the greatest driver of this bill, and he sent back because of clause 4 saying that local content should not only include Uganda but East Africa, which is okay. But there was a slight debate in Parliament where Nsamba actually said this is not necessary because Kenya is quite protectionist. He cited that. But then I think it's covered in clause 34, which says our local content bill will only protect countries that reciprocate the same systems. So I think that kind of covers, and there was a whole debate with Kafuzi saying that if we passed it in that format, it would be challenged against East African protocols.
Right.
That said, we have to question ourselves, and this is a bit technical, on how does this bill actually, will this bill actually serve the interest of the people that it seeks to serve? Will it serve the interest of Ugandans?
That's
Or is it a particular section of, let me not call them schemers, though I've said it, but lobbyists? Is it a particular section of lobbyists that will benefit? I think in economics, generally, the argument, I don't know about your times, but has been a lot about that free trade, free market systems are the best for the country. And there's a strong argument for that. When we have, and this is what I think the president also relies on, when he's sending back these bills, in spirit he's saying we need to foster a free market system within the country. I see you shaking your head. I welcome. But what happens normally is that in the short term, yes, there could be some people locally that benefit.
Absolutely.
But I think that in general, in terms of the general population, the average worker, that putting in place protectionist policies bars a certain type of, first of all, in terms of investment, manufacturing, but also import-export, that benefit the average man. The free market system benefits the lowest of people.
Yes.
Right now, everybody can afford. I mean, these things people sell on the streets, torches, solar something, because of, this free market system that we have. I think, so for that purpose, in my opinion, I think the bill is too wide. In my opinion, I believe that.
Is that where lawyers say it is ambiguous?
It's not ambiguous, but it's too wide.
Okay.
I believe that if we are going to protect local content, it has to be targeting a particular sector for a particular reason, and perhaps even time bound. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that in the wider, if it's left as wide as it is, it opens up a negative, because there are indexes that measure free trade, and these are the items that are used in the centers of investment, centers of banking, when people are consulting on whether to invest in a particular country.
Right.
Yeah. So just a few seconds. Yeah. So I think in general, we could target particular sectors, particular fields where we need to protect the locals. But in general, I believe that we should always tilt towards having as free a market as possible for Uganda.
Right. Harris, we know that President Museveni, even with this local content bill, we know he is pushing for the East African integration. And that has been one of his, I think, core East African agenda. But now with this local content bill, I see somewhere that Kafuzi was arguing that if other countries are imposing non-tariff barriers violating the ESC protocol, Uganda does not have to. Where does this leave us? And of course, referring to what Olaa said about protectionism. And Kenya is overly doing that.
Well, I think that this poor economic strategy by the East African countries, it's like a fight of crabs within a bottle. This one is trying to get out, and then they're pulling down each other. But there are several studies that have been made around use of non-tariff barriers for enhancement of competitiveness. For example, giving tax holidays to foreign investors. And the conclusion has been actually that it doesn't benefit the recipient countries. So broadly speaking, in the long run, I don't think that countries which are not respecting the provisions of the East African protocols are necessarily benefiting themselves. And that being said, I don't think that two wrongs make it a right. I think that Uganda shouldn't pursue its trade policy based on what these other countries are not out of the respect of particular laws per se, but rather out of a broader strategic direction. Commenting about the local content bill, I think it's a good law. I think in terms of market, East Africa is even small. We recently been talking about the African Free Trade Area.
Yeah.
What is our actual problem as Africans, as Ugandans, is they're actually structural. Even when we are talking about East Africans, how many Ugandans cross from Uganda to Tanzania, to Kenya? How many Kenyans come here to trade? It's a significant number compared to the Europeans who come here, to the Asians who come here. A small number. So we need to ask fundamental, cornerstone, hallmark questions. Questions like, how do you build a crisscrossing rail transport system across Africa or East Africa that therefore helps your citizens to be more productive? So I think that largely it will remain on the shelves.
Yes. Another one of those.
Yeah, but I think what we need to be thinking more about is enhancement of the productivity of the citizens. Because even when you say you're putting quotas that you're not supposed to employ, if you're a foreign farm, you're not supposed to employ beyond this number of foreign expatriates, or if you're, for example, SINUC, that you're supposed to import, you're supposed to use locally produced products like eggs, like bananas, but your local producers don't have capacity to meet the standards. Because those farms which are doing extraction of oils, to give an example, their workforce, the work pool they use, have certain standards. I think against they have world established standards, which our local suppliers are not meeting.
They have no idea.
So even when the law dictates this, but your local suppliers actually don't have capacity,
there's a clause there that says UNBS can
lower the standards.
No, first
Can
of all,
we waive
according to the local content bill, UNBS is the global standard.
It is.
As long as you're operating in
Yes.
UNBS is the global standard.
It meets.
And once the authorities sign,
that's an illusion.
even that's one of the issues, that it's not practical.
It's actually because it is part of the international standards body, and yes, their standards are global. So,
but Lynn, you see, UNBS cannot come and say that our standards are the global standards. Because these
deals are made in London. Some of them,
Interestingly, as you know. So David Bahati, the Minister of State for Trade, noted that Uganda spends time to negotiate agreements and protocols, and they should be respected. We shall soon be moving from Buy Uganda, Build Uganda to Buy Africa, Build Africa. We have secured a market for all the 54 African countries. That is what he says. Now, this brings me to you, Joseph. With this local content bill, and the young people here are telling us that it's another one that's going to be on the shelves, and it's wide, according to Olaa, and it needs to be revisited, and the president hasn't assented to it. Do you see us going anywhere with this bill, and is it going to make sense at all?
I think I said during the break, before we started, that it actually is absolutely unnecessary. It's not necessary at all, but some of the concerns are obvious. These are policy issues. As I said, I am big on government and big on political parties and political party leadership and thinking ideas. And as I said, I'm delighted that the young panelists, friends, colleagues of ours here are clearly towards the direction of thinking and thinking deep. I take you back, a bit boring as usual, but it's a powerful one, that as early as the early 60s, at independence in 1962, we had a transformed social democratic economy, and I will talk about this thing about that is social democratic. And it's interesting, Olaa, I wanted to start with that one, actually, the idea that free market system is the best. No, free market system is the biggest threat to Africa. Neoliberalism is one of the biggest, big things. But Olaa comes from a background of, without prejudice, I don't, possibly, guys who would possibly link towards DP and DP Association, I'm not saying all like wow kind of stuff, will think because DP is a conservative political party, they will tend to want to go for that. But in Africa, we tend to go for it blindly. No, neoliberalism is actually part of the problem. When the Bretton Woods institutions got around these things to open up, globalization kind of agenda, what they're really trying to say was that Africa, open your market, we come and dump the junk. Open your market, we come and mine your gold. Open your market, we come and mine the oil. Open your market, and of course, some crumbs will remain, and you guys will also put in a bit of suits, and it will be okay. Yeah. That really by and large is it. But then when I take you back to the 60s conversation I was trying to say, government as early as 1966, 67, 68, in fact, at the peak, that was about 6 years towards independence. Government already had a big issue with the foreign investors here, the British and particularly the Israelis, who were big in construction. And what apparently was saying at the time was that we're a young independent nation. This is important for you guys because you guys are going to push these things forward. We're a young independent nation. Granted that independence, we had few graduates and few skills and we want to be able to develop this. We reject the idea that you come with a big construction company, whether it's housing or infrastructure, and you're saying that you have the director, you have the four persons, and then only the cleaners and the wheelbarrow drawers as Ugandan. That's local content. Or what I said, no. And I'm told as early as 1966, 67, he already had issues with big corporations, let alone the fact that in 1968 he went into to check some of the big British corporations. Hence, actually, some of the disagreements mixed. What am I saying? I'm saying these are commonsensical issues that a UPC government of today, the idea that you say to Tenny Rowlands, come and buy the entire cotton industry, just give us a bit of profit, and of course we get a little bit of taxes, we invest in education. No. By the Tenny Rowlands in 1982, I'm just pushing you guys forward, very important. Tenny Rowlands met about in 1982, apparently wanted to buy the cotton industry and wanted to have some rights on oil and coffee. And because of what he refused, and he wanted to bribe Obote, this official, Obote threatened to arrest him. And as a result, he was humiliated, left Kampala, at a meeting arranged by Kenneth Kaunda, left Entebbe, went to Nairobi, flew to London, and went and started supporting the Musevenis in Sweden. These are facts. But the important point here is that these the sharks, and you guys, because you're interested, check on Londro, the company associated with China Rollins. So the big Western corporations that come basically to loot. But what was government saying? We are playing protectionist, but we relatively mixed economy. Yeah. We are saying that yes, we agree that there's a profit motive, but we also agree that the state has got a role. But the state is the big regulator. Now, the most capitalist state in the world is American, the big bully global boy. You don't just pick Ugandan coffee, however nicely from Bugisu, and then you just go and dump it in America. You don't. So these are leadership issues. These are political issues. These are ideological issues. There are no contradictions. Social democratic nations are the most powerful, the most organized. The Scandinavian nations of this world, the Norways, the Swedens, the Luxembourgs, So the idea is that Norway, for example, they're big on tax. This is not a bit of ideological conversation. They're big on taxation. But public services amongst the best, education amongst the best. So these are the balancing conversations you guys are going to have, you need to be able to have, we need to be able to have today. And maybe your generation is able to help bring these things so that our politics becomes slightly much more ideological, away from Museveni and personalities to really values and issues based. Now, back to this. What absolutely, and both of you guys have said, what absolutely is the right thing that needs to be done? Government needed from 40 years is such a long time, Mr. Museveni, to have been pushing, agro-based processing. 2 days ago, I was recruiting a young lawyer, into UPC, and this is official. And I was telling this young lady that, you know what, in Nagongera there was a ginnery, where cotton was processed, you can produce oil, and from the ginnery, you take it to African Textile Mill in Bali and O90 in Jinja, and they make the top-class finished products, including the suit I'm putting on, and then they sell to Marks and Spencer's, which is top market in supermarket in UK and CNA and in America. Meaning that we've never done these things here before. Now that's what we need to do. But if we don't do that, we're going to wait for second-hand clothes, dead people's clothes from from China,
Right.
second hand. Now,
Right.
very quickly, the things you see in the streets, yes, as a result of globalization, but they're not necessarily the beauty of free trade. If anything, we've now ended up being dumping grounds for some of this toy to be tried and tested.
Absolutely.
So I think there is a balance to be able to strike. Governments can and should make a decision to say that, look, our oil sector is this, or we've found we're building this thing, and we're building a big oil project in Hoima.
Yes.
We are simply saying that when you're coming, as a local, when you're coming, this is how much you're going to bring in terms of skills, technology, and money. But also, this is how much you're going to take out. And if it's going to be difficult a discussion, you're a lawyer, you say, you put a particular level in terms of taxation, and you balance it out.
You see, actually, you bring out the oil and gas issue because I think it is one of the reasons we have the local content bill. I want to believe.
Yeah, it was
the
actually.
strongest driver. And I worry if we didn't have oil, for example, would we have thought about
It came out in 2003. The first.
That's true, the
Right.
first, but it was taken back. And we know even then we were ready for what? For oil and
yes,
gas.
yeah,
So,
for oil, yeah.
so, and if you're to be part of the oil and gas industry in this world, you've got to have global standards. And clearly, I'm sure a law is one of the requirements. So if you're saying that it is there, it might not do what it is supposed to do, where then does it leave us? And I'll begin with you as we begin to wind up.
No, I mean, I agree with you, Lynn, that the strongest drive of this bill has been the oil and gas industry.
Yes.
And immediately after that, there was a survey of workforce within industries. of
Yes.
Uganda.
Yes.
And one of the skill that is needed are the welders. But these welders must be at the international standard because
Yes.
oil is
Internationally
highly
certified.
international.
Highly skilled and technical, yes.
Highly skilled and highly
technical.
inflammable. So it's dangerous. So you need to make sure that you have a workforce that actually does top level work. But when that research was done, it indicated that to begin with, there was no certified firm in Uganda that can train certified welders.
And then we went forward and created one. I think we have it.
So I think this is a question.
But there's still a gap. You're right.
It's
Yeah.
a question. Yeah. I mean, and so getting that we have a welding economy, it's highly informal, but all of them cannot produce any work. They cannot be employed in the sector. So are you going to certify them, get them in time? No.
Can I just say very quickly that actually that was part of an indictment of this government after 40 years, that the gaps about skilling, like Chambogo, is it Chambogo Naka vocational training institutions? This government found tertiary institutions, technical institutions like Chambogo particularly, that was high skill, high level. Again, as I said the day before yesterday, I was having a conversation with an accountant who was talking about his father who left Senior 4, went to a technical institution, but they're now among the best engineers. So some of these things are structural, as you guys talked about much earlier. And so lessons from this, away from the merits or demerits of this, again, conversations should be had about our education, but quality of education. Our education, but perhaps which areas of education do we invest the most? And indeed, our infrastructure, be it whether it's roads, and sometimes when people talk about infrastructure, they talk about some funny road to Entebbe. But no, our infrastructure really includes the potholes, roads of Kampala, but physical infrastructure, meaning institutions, schools, and indeed some of these other areas where
institutions that actually work. And Olaa, conclusively, on this bill and on this the entire conversation, your concluding remarks.
Yeah, I think perhaps as my brother, elder brother Cheng was speaking, I figure that we actually agree more than we disagree.
Yeah, fair enough.
The only difference between us is a biographic context. He comes from a romantic, reminiscent background of reminiscent about the good old
UPC.
and as you can see, he tried to bring us up to around 1982. I come from the 90s. I'm a 90s baby. At the time when Capital had won, we are born in actually neoliberalism was forced into our country. Privatization was complete. So my thinking process is more pragmatic. We are both trying to forge a social a system that has social nets.
Yes.
You know, an economy that works but that has social nets. My arguments are more pragmatic because of my reality is more recent than his. But then we are all, I think, coming towards the same. And that's why if nothing was taken from my conversation, I actually mostly insisted that these things need to be targeted. Can there be a skilling bill? You know, can there be a bill targeting a particular aspect of, if we're talking about the petroleum industry, you know, maybe they should have improved that. Then you move to another sector, maybe within the guidelines of different, you know, suppliers of government. What we have now as the bill should be within all those guidelines. So what I'm saying is that targeting is more important than having such a wide bill, which functionality, in terms of functionality in a capitalist and a globalized world, actually takes us down in the index of countries that are investor friendly. I think we generally agree that we are trying to build a functional economy.
You think we are trying? I feel like we are all over the place.
No. I'm just. This is what I'm saying. This is what I'm saying.
Yes.
I think there are a lot of factors that Ochieng's perspective eliminates in terms of the functionalities of where we are currently. While Uganda is a dumping ground, you could call it a dumping ground as such, but a lot of Ugandans actually access a lot of things through this free market system. A lot of functional things for our day-to-day life.
Okay, let's see.
So
let's see.
I think that I actually, contrary to your pragmatic thinking, I think that when you look at, when you do an analysis of world trade, and you look at the, you know, the balance of payment, you can see that developing countries lose a lot in terms of trade to the developed world.
That's true.
Actually, the money developing countries receive from the developed world in terms of aid is too much less than what the developed world takes out of Africa in terms of trade.
No.
And that's why, just a moment, and that's why I agree with my senior Ochieno that because these developed countries are experts, they're more competent in this area more than us. They've designed a system that engenders neoliberal values, which allow them to, you know, they open your markets up. And when the markets are opened up, you're never going to compete with an industry in the UK, which has been in the business for the last 100 years. And your industry, which is underfunded here.
And the UK government that invests directly in the skills of their people today. So it's not romantic.
Exactly. So it has the state's infrastructure behind it. It has more experience. It has all the resources. But it's the free trade policies tells you it has to compete with a Ugandan startup, which is not supported by the government because the government has no capacity. When we say the
government has no interest. Ideologically, they don't have an interest.
Maybe both, maybe capacity and finally.
And
when you come to agriculture, where these countries maybe have a little bit of competitive advantage over UK and USA, then USA tells you, but we have certain phytosynthetic standards, which your coffee, which your bananas, which your apples cannot meet. And yet, America, and yet UK, which is talking about non-tariff barriers, is subsidizing their farmers. So either way, it's a problem of neocolonialism, it's a problem of control, it's a problem of one man, weak man being subjugated by a stronger man. And the only way out is for the weak man to internally interrogate ways how he's going to survive the subjugation.
Absolutely. And Joseph, you were, as they talked to you, really had lots. What was that?
No, indeed, I'll make it brief. One, China is actually a communist state. And some of the things being dumped in the streets of Kampala are actually Chinese, number one. Number two, China is a communist state. But China's state companies, and these are for people who buy conservatism in Africa, you know, Chinese state companies come and actually do businesses here. And in many cases, they do better businesses allegedly than some of the companies here. But they actually do competitive businesses. Now we ask ourselves, why did we, for instance, sell our construction companies, you know, in the name of privatization, to allow a Chinese Chinese state company to come here? I had a conversation. There was a television debate over 10 years ago in which I had Mr. Kasaida, the minister. You know, I saw his name the other day on Iron Sheets, and we were having a conversation about it was a Uganda Broadcasting without prejudice, Uganda Broadcasting Corporation, and there was a keynote speaker himself and the head of Kenya Commercial Bank, and I was critiquing this regime for selling out our public resources from railways that you referred to roads, airlines, and including Uganda Commercial Bank, which was a profitable bank. And I said that, well, look, now Uganda Commercial Bank has been sold in the name of, say, you know, the state can't run these things. But Kenya Commercial Bank is now here in Uganda. No, we as Africans, particularly the youth of this country, of this continent, need to very urgently begin to investigate the background to Bretton Woods institutions. One, the youth of this continent they need that in order to challenge their leadership. They need to investigate and challenge the ideological question of left-right polity, because that's a global imperative. The role of governments, the role of the state, question of fiscal and taxation policies as a matter of course, and political parties need to gain much more interest in this, including here in Uganda. I find it extremely lacking. And to do so, in my opinion, will help us to begin to see what is the role of who and in many of these issues. The absent question is the idea that capitalism good, the alternative is bad. As I said before, and I'll repeat, the most successful nations in the world in terms of quality of living, beyond Singapore, which is by and large, the quality Western oriented, but actually the ideology pushing them are center left. Are countries mainly from Western Europe, meaning Scandinavian countries. And so I'm simply saying that, look, no, it's okay for people to be conservative and believe in the open market system, which by and large we, the certain left people, do believe. And then actually there's a very thriving private sector in Uganda. But you simply say the state is the head parent as the chief regulator. And that's where we come in. Where is the state when we're saying that China is coming to dump this, which is part of what we're trying to say. And where in the state in cushioning the lowest of the low?
That's why we have the local content bill.
Precisely. And where is the state in making sure that we educate, train, capacitate our people and negotiate? And I know you're trying to say that in part it is that, but in part it should have been happening. That's why there was necessarily no need. Local content bill will not do anything unless we educate, we train and skill our people. Now, you can talk local content, but if Pineti is able to come and be called a girl by Mr. Museveni and be handed coffee, and there is no evidence that she has done anything to Loboa, when UPC built big 22 hospitals in 8 years, today equivalent to 150 hospitals in 8 years, some of those infrastructures have never been matched today. What happened at the time? Who were building those things amongst Ugandans? And who were those people where we got the monies? Where after all these software miracle economies, we're not able to do better. Those are the things we need to be able to investigate.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Ola, you had something to say.
No, I realized that the problem was my tone. I think we are all, and I think the success of this conversation is, we all agree that the local content bill is insufficient, is long overdue, and it's more of a wider issue than just the bill itself.
Right.
There are systemic problems with it. But then, where we differ is maybe how we look at a way forward. And that this probably comes at the right time towards the end. I think that our nations are made up of human beings. And like every human being, we are defined by the challenges that we meet. When we came here, you said lawyers dress in a certain way. That's because they went to law school. Doctors will dress in a certain way. Absolutely. Engineers will act in a certain way. Now, the nation is a combination of human beings and the human experience. And the journey of our country depends on the moment of the times that we face. The Ochengs were fighting the Cold War, which the left happened to lose at the time. Right now, and I think this is very important in finding a way forward, especially, is how do we, knowing very well that we need a functional economy, we live in a country that is consumerist. I would love to think that it would really be a hard question on my brother here to take away a lot of the consumerism benefits in a generation that has been, I could say, consumerism has been infiltrated into our minds. We do not know empty supermarkets. We come into a shop and see so many varieties. So given that reality, given the changing dynamics, now, like I was saying...
But the empty stores are not the alternative. I know the nuances you're trying to suggest.
No.
But those are not the alternative. But carry on.
We could calibrate each other.
Yeah.
But looking at what now, Uganda is like a country that a person that has finished A-level and now has to join university. And because we are at a phase where you have to hop on the next stage. And we have a new dynamic in place, the multipolar world that is coming up. We have the East and West trying to balance each other up, which changes the whole dynamic. You know, we haven't been faced with this before. So, like Harris was saying, Africa needs to wake up. And I happen to work in a minerals company. I actually even know the figures that are moving out in terms of illicit mineral flows. But for the first time as young people, coming from a generation that values social democratic nets and social democratic values, but also lives in a consumerist reality. We have a new opportunity to negotiate with the world in this, emerging multipolar dynamics that we have never faced before. Absolutely. So I'd rather concern myself with balancing everything. There's always a Nash equilibrium. There's always a dominant, two ideas engaging each other, but there's a truth somewhere in the middle. Absolutely. I'd rather engage myself in... You're the minority. I'd rather invest in navigating the upcoming multipolar dynamics. And together with my African young friends, finding, finding ideas, finding way forward that covers this practical reality. I don't think the romantic left and the romantic right helps us at this time, because we are now actually facing a new challenge of our time. So that is how I would approach it.
Harris, the bill's objective apparently is to impose local content obligations on persons or entities using public money or utilizing Uganda's natural resources or are carrying out activities requiring licensee to prioritize, I think it is licenses, I beg your pardon, to prioritize Ugandan citizens, Ugandan and resident companies in public procurement.
Precisely.
I see us shooting ourselves in the foot. Because already we have failed, and this brings me back to where he talks about consumerism. We have failed to protect our own people, even before without a bill, without anything. We are, as he says, a dumping ground. We have all the Chinese products coming in here. And here we have a law. What are we going to do with what's on us right now?
Yeah, let me start by making an observation, and it's borrowed from, it rhymes with an observation by Lord Sampsons in his brief lecture titled The Law's Expanding Empire. And he says that there is a tendency now all across the world to think that the law is a solution to everything. So when there's a problem about morality, you think about the law. So you legislate the anti-homosexuality bill, which you very well know you're not going to enforce. Because it is practically impossible to implement. You're not going to go into bedrooms of people, install cameras. You're not going to do that. And besides that, you have the penal code, which which would otherwise cover what you're trying to legislate about that. You want to enhance local productivity, and instead of looking for capital and training the local workforce and curbing corruption and building an institutional an infrastructure framework that engenders productivity because of your failures, but in order to portray, to be seen. No, movement is not equal to
busy.
progress. To be seen, to be busy. You say, okay, let's legislate. The problem is here.
And we have quite a number.
So we have quite a number. And I think this is a problem that we need to start discussing.
Absolutely.
Thinking that every problem, every societal problem, problems of implementation, problems of strategy, problems of corruption, and thinking that we are going to end them with legislation. So for me, that's what I think is a problem. And I don't have so much hope in terms of effectiveness of the local content bill. In terms of the framework, the aspirations are good, but that is not something that is going to help the common
And it's
man.
absurd that we, every other time, for everything that we're talking about, our leadership, and Joseph, I need you to help me on this. Every time we are talking about things of leadership in this country, we're like, that's another one. It won't do much. I mean, does this qualify what Ola said at the start, that we are really, we are not, what was the word?
Demoralized?
We are demoralized.
Yeah, and Ola is a very good young guy, as I said. But part of what Ola is saying is precisely the very important point, that you can actually see with the prejudice, it's not a personal thing, that actually the Ola generation, and Ola is the top cream of this generation, are so much lost up into having been absolutely shortchanged by the state, by institutions, by governments, in many cases by parents, that they, quote, do not know any other. Harris has suggested, when I was discussing in the 60s, that what I was saying in the 60s was not what they were taught. And he may be talking about a professor or a PhD holder. And I'm saying that when I talk to many young people today, particularly young people who've got master's degrees, I say, you cannot have a master's degree and not have the capacity to critique every question.
There is a lot out there, even professors who cannot critique basic arguments.
Precisely. Now that's the worry. So it's on the one hand, we started from a very optimistic world, but right now that is the challenge. But still, my hope is that my message, and it will continue with spaces like yours and colleagues like this, that we should continue to interrogate these things, knowing very well that one of the things I'm saying is that this country and its future is possible, that better has happened. And if there was better, because those better were true, what you guys read is NRA propaganda, and they cannot challenge. Precisely. If better happened 50 years ago, surely today must be better. And if better happened then, I'm completely convinced that if we get this right, without prejudice, there is no reason why the best cannot be in the future.
We need a time machine.
And so just very quickly, we won't do that. And so very quickly, on this ideological thing, I'm still encouraging my young friends, including the young viewers, to go back and school these things. The conversation taking place in Kenya is cost of living. The conversation taking place in South Africa is cost of living.
Absolutely.
Part of the issues in Nigeria and Senegal, which may be democratic issues. The happenings in Britain, where I spent a bit of time, and some of whom are my colleagues in the trade unions. The trade union the other day just won 14.4% in pay rise, and part of the conversation is about renationalizing key sectors of the economy, meaning that in a way elements of neoliberalism have not worked on the one hand, but number two, that the states, even in established capitalist establishments, must play their cushioning roles, and part of that, and that is why in America presidents are judged per month on how many jobs they put in the market. And experts then come ahead, what quality of jobs? Were they just cleaning jobs or whatever? So these are what happens. And I'm asking young Ugandans, young East Africans, wake up and see the realities. The Ochieno's way are not romantic realities. The Ochieno's way are realities today. And if anything, my opinion is that going forward, let it be a distilled element of Ochieno's and other ways that you guys find. But don't fight yourself on the basis of whatever is happening today. In many cases, in Uganda's case, is primarily Victor's history. But I must say that I'm actually quite optimistic going forward. Young Ugandans will have to take ownership of this country, compel the regime to begin to do things in certain ways, or actually make this regime go and rest, so that a new thinking, a new direction, a new leadership can attempt to rejig with this nation state to take it forward.
Absolutely. Olaa, way forward.
So, yeah, thank you very much.
In a minute.
Yeah. Way forward for me is, I do not think much is going to change after this bill. I think Uganda, in a more globalized, complementary world, we need to start looking at our strategic advantages. There's a lot of things we can sell to the world, including the young people about our age, no good English, can do a lot of services, just need some last mile training in terms of human resource alone, but also in terms of our resources. That at a regional level, like we were complaining about outflows in terms of what we lose as a continent. I think the biggest challenge, and I was watching yesterday that Africa is built on 5 plateaus that make it infrastructure development very complicated. But for me, I think one of the main roles of ACTFA, and if ACTFA could solve issues like the infrastructure problem, movement, physically, we have the tariff issues. If we could solve a lot of those problems, I think moving forward, we have a unique opportunity as Africa to leverage on a multipolar world. There are 2 growing hegemonies and a lot of sub-hegemonies within that give us a new opportunity to negotiate and give us hope as a young generation.
Absolutely. Harris, moving forward, we wind up.
My way forward is threefold. Number one, a country is as good as its education. There are those of us who have been lucky to go to school. We have a huge responsibility to mobilize the rest of the country, enhance its productivity, and put pressure on the government to demand accountability. The country is as good as its citizens. There is no one single person who can liberate the nation. It's only the people who can liberate any nation. And it's our job, those who understand how governments work, to go down there and mobilize others. Number 3, and lastly, as young people across Africa, we need to mobilize each other to demand minimums from our governments. We need to interact with young people across East Africa to demand that every government in place must pledge to an East African railway because we want to enhance social mobility. We must mobilize young people through the African Union and say we want the Grand Inga Dam, which would be the biggest dam in Africa, in the whole world, and would power the entire sub-Saharan Africa, but has not been constructed. Why? Because African governments have refused to commit monies. For me, my hope is in Agenda 2063 that was launched, I think, around 2015. So these minimums for the next 30 years, Olaa, that you and I are going to be active, we need to use them to demand governments across Africa establish minimums that engender productivity.
Absolutely. Joseph.
Just very quickly, that I hope that for our legislators, for whom this program is, that let there be parliamentary committees are tough places, and usually chairpersons of parliamentary select committees are much more respected in many cases than most senior ministers. So they should do their jobs properly, number one. Number two, so they should be able to, they should use their resources well. So probes should be probes about those that really matter to the country and citizens. By and large, they have done well, but they should be able to begin to have the meat of ensuring that whatever proposal they put, whoever is in government, is able to deliver, so that these things actually have an end goal rather than just being taken around. And number 2, on the question of the local content situation, as I said before, it's an open conversation, but no, the implication to me going forward is that if we do not deal with the underlying issues, as you yourself suggested, it might mean that in many cases a waste of time. But 3, and lastly, that young people on this continent, young people in Uganda, need to take up ownership and begin to get politicized enough to critique, knowing very well that every decision is supposed to be made in their behalf, and every decision taking place is going to catch up with them in 60, 2063 as being hinted. So the point is there is no hiding, and the sooner they took up ownership in Uganda and then East Africa, and I like the way you're trying to put it across that as a content that young African people should wake up, take position, and then look at how our independence leaders played. I think if they considered and took note from some of independence leaders, notwithstanding the Cold War challenges they had, that they were able to do amidst that to liberate Southern Africa, to liberate this African continent, that no, the future of this continent is possible. The richest continent, it must really be the lead future for the global peace and security and development.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ola. Thank you, Harris. And thank you, Joseph, indeed, for your time and for very interesting conversation. It's been very interesting, very edifying. And I hope those of you who've been watching, it has been good for you because you need to stick around. We have so much more on Civic Space TV. There's so much that happens. If you check out our YouTube channel, and we have a lot that we package for you, our dear viewers. Thank you so very much, and we'll catch you again on another episode of Focus on Parliament. I wish you the very best.